Mother Betty Moorhead and I work with the library for Books Between Bites program, and I always give my little bit before we start that I keep a email list and email out once a month our upcoming program, and then in August send out our new season. If you're not on the email list and you'd like to be, just raise your hand and I'll get this clipboard to you, and I'll also set it up here if you think about it later before you leave today. But you just get an email once a month about the upcoming program. So if there's someone here that would like it right now, if not, I'll put it here. And then I'm going to introduce a few people. Here's Stacy Peterson from the library, who's going to do the next introduction.
Thanks, Becky. It's my pleasure today to introduce Daniel Russo, who's going to say a few words today. He's the chair of the Citizens for Batavia Public Library.
Good afternoon. I am Daniel Russo, and I am working with the Citizens for Batavia Public Library. It's really hard to believe, I think, but it was 17 years ago almost when this building opened. And one of the strongest memories I have of that is when 6,000 people lined up in the parking lot in a beautiful January day to see the inside of this building. And it's so impressive to see what the library has become. One of the statistics is that over 250,000 people visited the library last year. So, that's kind of the exciting part. But when a building starts getting to be this age, it's starting to need repairs. And so the library board did a study and a capital asset plan that outlines the repairs and maintenance that need to be done to the building for the next 20 years. And this is actually a really good time to have this plan because the bonds that pay off this building will retire in December. And I hope that the library has put a referendum on the ballot. And that ballot asks voters to take the 7 cents that was being used to pay back the building bonds and to put that toward operations. What that means is that the tax rate for Batavia voters will not change. It will stay at 44 cents. But the library gets 3 benefits from that. Number 1, they'll be able to undertake the maintenance needs that need to be done to the building. Second, they'll be able to establish a reserve fund for future repairs. And 3, there'll be a small amount to maintain and improve services. So the Citizens Committee is talking to groups, helping them become aware of the referendum. On the table on the side, there's a couple brochures that explain what I just talked about very quickly. This one gives you a quick overview, and this one gives you much more detailed information about the referendum. So voting is November 6th. Actually, local or early voting is going to start Monday. So we certainly hope that everyone comes out and votes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Daniel. As Becky mentioned, I'm Stacy Peterson, the Adult Services Manager here at the library, and it's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker. It's been my good fortune to work with George Scheetz since he became library director in 2004. And this morning I'd like to share a few facts about George before he begins. He's been a librarian for over 40 years, 30 of those years as a library director. Not only is he a librarian, he's also a Rotarian, and it rhymes. He's a past president and previous Rotarian of the Year with the Rotary Club of Batavia. And if you've ever wondered who brought Bulldogs Unleashed and Cha Night to Batavia, he's standing right here in the red. When he's not working on those things, he enjoys spending time with his longtime significant other, Cindy, who lives in Champaign, where she cares for her father, who turns 99 today. Wow. Yes. George also enjoys spending time with his 2 children and 2 grandchildren and his cat. If you want to have a lively discussion about any of the following topics, you're going to want to talk to George. We're talking about books, especially books by Philip Jose Farmer and Thorne Smith, place names like Batavia, Peoria, many other place names, the Addams Family, Georgemas, which is a holiday you may or may not have heard of. He can fill you in. Words that end in GRY, and local history. And local history is what brings us together today. George has lived in Batavia since 2004 and has embraced it. In 2014, he was the recipient of the Donna Della Sassi Award from the Batavia Chamber of Commerce for outstanding commitment and dedication to the Chamber's vision. He's written columns for the Batavia Historical Society's newsletter, and using his reference librarian skills, he has uncovered some never-before-known facts about the Batavia-Geneva football rivalry. Please join me in welcoming George Scheetz.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I do love Batavia. I've lived in many places in my life, and in fact, this is the 5th public library I've worked with and for, but Batavia has become very special to me. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes. Very good. Thanks. Well, the biggest game of the season, my talk today is dedicated to Dennis J. Piron Jr., head football coach at Batavia High School in the 106th year of the rivalry, from 1913 to 2018, in grateful appreciation for his help with and support of this project. Coach Piron holds the distinction of being the first coach in Batavia football history to compile undefeated regular season records in his first 2 years as head coach, 2011 and 2012, and even more remarkable, undefeated conference records and championships in his first 5 years as head coach, from 2011 to 2015. In 2013, Batavia won its first ever Illinois State Football Championship in Class 6A and its second in Class 7A just 4 years later, last year in 2017. And I'm going to knock on wood so I don't jinx him, but he's one game away from having another undefeated season in the new conference. My research on Batavia football history led to a need to learn more about early football history in general. So with your indulgence, before we get started on Batavia's high school athletic traditions and the Batavia-Geneva rivalry, I want to share with you, very briefly, one particular aspect of American football history. What is a gridiron? Or more precisely, why do we call a football field a gridiron? As described in Outdoor Sports and Games, published in 1911 by Claude H. Miller, a football field is 330 feet long by 160 feet wide. At each end are goalposts set 18 feet 6 inches apart with a crossbar 10 feet above the ground. The field is marked off in chalk lines, similar to a tennis court, these lines being 5 yards apart. The center of the field, where the play starts, is 55 yards from either end. It is usually customary to run lines parallel to the sides of the field, also 5 yards apart, but as the field is but 160 feet wide, the first and last of these lines are but 5 feet from the side lines instead of 5 yards. The lines on a football field make a checkerboard effect and have given to the field the name gridiron. Now, the word gridiron, in use since the 14th century, refers to a metal grid for cooking food over a fire and derives from the same root word as griddle. The ball would be snapped in the grid in which it was downed on the previous play. And the grid system was abandoned in favor of the system of yard lines and hash marks that we use today. I think it used up an awful lot of chalk, I'm pretty sure. Here are several examples of actual gridirons, that is, playing fields that were painted with a grid pattern of crisscross lines. So first we have Harvard Stadium, which opened in November of 1903. And you can see the grid pattern there. The next one image features the Canton Bulldogs versus the Massillon Tigers of the Ohio League, played on a true gridiron in November 1906. Ohio became the center of professional football during the early decades of the 20th century, and small towns such as Massillon, Akron, Portsmouth, and Canton all supported professional teams in a loose coalition known as the Ohio League, which was the direct predecessor of today's National Football League. Here is Harvard substitute Vic Kennard's field goal that beat Yale 4-0 for the 1908 College Football National Championship. In 1908, a field goal was worth 4 points. This photograph comes from the 1916 book Football Days by William Edwards, in which the trajectory of the winning kick was helpfully illustrated, and the ball is circled in the middle, so you can see where the ball is. Coming closer to home, this next photograph comes from the University Archives of the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. This game took place nearly 15 years before Memorial Stadium opened. And then, finally, another of Harvard Stadium, and the colonnade was added to the Harvard Stadium in 1910, so you can see how different that picture looks. Now, on to the biggest game of the season, Batavia Bulldogs versus Geneva Vikings. Yes, indeed. I think I'm that green triangle on the left. First, a disclaimer. Due to time constraints, my primary focus today will be on Batavia and its traditions, and that's why I'm wearing my Batavia regalia today. So today we'll cover the following topics. Hail to the Crimson, Hail to the Gold, Batavia's traditions, the coaches, the record, and then highlights, factoids, and superlatives. So, by way of introduction, East Batavia and West Batavia high schools united in athletics in 1909, but did not play Geneva Community High School in football, except in a practice game, until 1913. 2018 marks the 105th anniversary and 106th year of this rivalry. Batavia and Geneva did not meet every year. In fact, they did not play in 1914 and 1915, 1918, 1934 and 1936 when Batavia dropped football completely for 3 years, and 1996 when the schools were in different divisions of the Suburban Prairie Conference. And the teams met twice in 2006. Both games were won by Batavia. Game 100 in the series took place this year on September 28. Except for an unprecedented 19-year win streak by Geneva from 1967 to 1985 under coach Jerry Oxtetter, the series has been remarkably even. Batavia has won 44 games, lost 51, and tied 5. The Illinois High School Association implemented tiebreaker rules in 1975, so ties are now a thing of the past. Unlike apparently in the National Football League, which had a tie this year. So hail to the Crimson, hail to the Gold. East Batavia and West Batavia were united in a new school district in April 1911 through the efforts of Superintendent Hugh A. Bone. The very few extant records suggest that many Batavia High School traditions started during this merger process, which actually began in September 1909, when one superintendent, Mr. Bone, had charge of both districts. No doubt such traditions as athletics, school colors, music, including school songs, and school publications became an important part of the unifying process. So school newspapers. Bone reported in 1913 that the first school paper, the Batavia School and Home Bulletin, which premiered in September 1910, and this is a direct quote, grew out of the need of some sort of authoritative means of communications between the school and the homes. Its purpose from the beginning has been serious, and in order to reach every house in Batavia, it was distributed gratis to every home by carrier. The bulletin served its purpose and ceased publication in 1913. I think its real purpose was to help promote unification between the two districts. It was succeeded in October 1926 by the Batavia Spectator, which many of you who grew up in Batavia are familiar with, which celebrates its 93rd volume during the current 2018-2019 school year. So school colors, part 1. The earliest known reference to Batavia High School's official colors appeared in the pages of the Batavia School and Home Bulletin for March 15, 1911, in What Made Batavia Famous, a poem by Edith N. Abernethy, a junior. It's our team that made us famous, not windmills we claimed of old. It's our team that made us famous, clad in sweaters of crimson and gold. This 32-line poem, which celebrated Batavia's 1911 basketball team and near championship season, just 1 year before Batavia won the Illinois State High School basketball tournament in 1912, was also a paean to unification. Consider the final quatrain. And it's not the east and west side, neither could do it alone. It's the combination of both schools, which we owe to Mr. Bone. Mr. Bone, incidentally, is really the only significant personality in Batavia school history that does not have a school building named for him. So that's my plug. Hail Alma Mater. The title of this segment of my presentation was taken from the opening lines of the song Hail Alma Mater, sung to the tune of Alma Mater from the University of Illinois. Hail to the crimson, hail to the gold. I'm not going to sing it, I'll say it though. Hail Alma Mater, ever so true. We love no other, so let our motto be, Victory Batavia, our high school. Unfortunately, the Batavia version lost the rhyme found in the University of Illinois version. This long-forgotten Batavia song, the inspiration for which is still sung at every Fighting Illini home game, was found on a mimeographed sheet of songs and yells discovered with a group of Batavia High School documents that were dated from 1925 to the 1930s. Loyalty song. Hugh A. Bone, who was superintendent from 1909 to 1916, was a graduate of the University of Illinois, which may explain the origin of Batavia's Loyalty song, which uses the tune and most of the lyrics of We're Loyal to You, Illinois, which was copyrighted in 1907 by T.H. Guild. It's one of the oldest college fight songs. The earliest known reference to the song is found in the 1916 BHS, which was the name of Batavia's yearbook, in which on page 137, the calendar entry for October 12, 1915 reads, "We resurrect the Loyalty song." I think the word resurrect is significant in this context because it suggests an older song that fell out of use and was rediscovered in that year. Yearbooks. Speaking of yearbooks, Batavia's original yearbook was the BHS, which was published from 1912 to 1917. Unfortunately, Superintendent Howard C. Storm discontinued publication of the Batavia High School Annual beginning with the 1917-18 school year, so there are no Batavia yearbooks from 1918 to 1944, which is really unfortunate. According to Marilyn Robinson, she was told by her friend and fellow teacher Lydia Jean Staffney, who taught Latin, that Dr. Storm told her that one of the regrets about his years at Batavia was that he did not allow the students to have a yearbook. The first volume of the Echo, the current title of the yearbook, appeared in 1945. The library has a complete set of the Batavia High School yearbooks through the 2017-2018 school year in our local history room. We have all 6 of the BHS volumes and all of the Echo volumes. But if any of you have volumes from of the junior high school yearbooks, we don't have any of those. So if you find any of those in your attic, please let us know. The cover of the 1974 edition of the Echo takes us back to Batavia's school colors, part 2. I mentioned previously that the earliest known reference to the crimson and gold as the school colors appeared in March 1911. In other words, Batavia's school colors were established and clearly identified with the athletic teams even before the merger of East Batavia District number 101 and West Batavia District number 102, which occurred in April 1911. So let's look at some other crimson and gold images. First, a class ring from 1932. Second, a wool felt pennant with sewn-on letters manufactured by the Colonial Pennant Company of Batavia, Illinois. And I have had no success at all figuring out where the Colonial Pennant Company was in Batavia, Illinois. Third, a bulldog is featured on this pennant. And fourth, this delightful image of a bulldog wagging its tail appeared on a vintage pennant and provides a segue to nicknames in a segment I call Et Tu Brutus, the Spirit of Batavia. This title will make sense in just a few moments. So first, a note on nicknames. The phenomenon of athletic team nicknames, sometimes called mascots, for high schools probably started in the 1920s, though most high schools did not adopt nicknames until the 1930s and 40s. Naperville and Wheaton, for example, became known as the Redskins and the Tigers, respectively, about 1939. while Freeport and DeKalb became known as the Pretzels, yes, the Freeport Pretzels, and Barbs, respectively, in the early to mid-1920s, if not earlier. Many of you know that DeKalb was known for its barbed wire industry, so thus the Barbs. There are many stories in Illinois about sports writers whose newspaper columns inspired high school nicknames, such as the Hoopston Corn Jerkers, the Centralia Orphans, the Monmouth Zippers, the Canton Little Giants, and the Fairfield Mules. One of the more famous examples of this phenomenon was Edwin N. Eddie Jaquin, sports editor of the News-Gazette in Champaign, Illinois from 1925 to 1942, who inspired such names as the Atwood Hammond Rajas, the Fisher Bunnies, now often called the Fighting Bunnies, as if that makes an improvement, and the Arcola Purple Riders. Jaquin was said to have supplied most members of the old Okaw Valley Conference in central Illinois with their nicknames. In the absence of formal nicknames, sports writers often described high school teams by their colors. For example, the blue and white for Geneva or the crimson for Batavia. So Batavia's nicknames. Batavia's famous Bulldog first appeared in the mid-1940s, but Batavia High School had other nicknames as early as 1932. Long before Batavia's athletic teams were called the Bulldogs, they were the Vikings. Yes, it's true. There is little doubt that the predominance of boys of Swedish descent on the football field and basketball court led to the Vikings nickname. The alliteration of the V in Batavia probably helped as well, and the name may have been inspired by a Swedish fraternal organization that was and still is active in Batavia, the Independent Order of Vikings. The Lodge of Batavia, ring number 18, was established in March 1904. The Viking name was prevalent in the Batavia Herald and Geneva Republican beginning with the 1932-33 school year. In a special edition of the East High Auroran in March of 1933, which served as a program for the district basketball tournament, Batavia was the only team with a nickname, Vikings, which I've got circled up there. The Vikings name appeared less frequently after Batavia dropped football in 1934 for 3 seasons, and by the late 1930s, the Batavia Herald regularly referred to them as the Crimson, actually from 1938 to 1944, occasionally in combination with other monikers such as Crimson Tiger, Crimson Tribe, and Crimson Tide. The Batavia sports writers clearly were trying out different names on their readers, an idea for which there is significant precedent, as I previously noted. We can only speculate on why the Vikings name fell out of favor. Alvin Sager, a 1937 Batavia graduate, suggested 2 possible reasons. Eastsiders, which is where Al Sager lived, mostly not Swedish, probably disliked the name, and the lack of a yearbook from 1918 to 1944 probably hurt the cause. Perhaps the last reference to Batavia Vikings in the Batavia Herald occurred in 1938. And this is directly from the newspaper. The moniker Vikings, which for many years has been the label used by sports writers, when identifying Batavia athletic teams, is about as appropriate this year as the Fighting Irish title is to Notre Dame. Most of this year's high school heavyweight football 11 was composed of students claiming German and English descent. Arnie Stenman was the only Viking to play a major role. And then back to me. Ironically, the team was actually called the Crimson Tide in the sports section of the same edition. It wasn't even called the Vikings. So why Bulldogs? Paul W. Peeler Bergeson Jr., a 1945 Batavia graduate as well as football captain and class president, noted that Coach Howard J. Lester, who was coach from 1944 to 1948, and then left for Arlington Heights, and had a great career over there, had arrived in Batavia and desired a nickname. The Vikings name had fallen into disuse and was picked up by Geneva circa 1942-43. Peeler recalled that the Bulldog name was chosen by a student vote, though found no such records that have survived for that. The first known reference to Batavia Bulldogs occurred in the Batavia Herald on Friday, February 16, 1945, at least the first I could find. The name appeared for the first time in a yearbook in the 1946 Echo for the 1945-46 school year. Therefore, I date the name Bulldogs to 1945. Before long, Bulldogs merchandise began to appear. This image features the cover of a commercially produced student scrapbook with fuzzy letters. You remember the fuzzy letters that used to be on the scrapbook covers? Which was owned by a member of the class of 1949. In November 1967, the Bulldog was officially named Brutus in a contest won by Diane Schrader, then a junior at Batavia High School. In spite of the headline, I was told that Diane actually spells her name with one N, not two. This final image related to nicknames features a variety of Batavia Bulldog badges throughout the years. The only one that I can date with any certainty is the one produced by the Batavia Public Library in 2011, or maybe 2012, which shows you how well I kept a record on that. I love the old-fashioned beanie hat on the two in the upper left. Moving on to athletic conferences. Red Grange was still in high school at Wheaton when the Little Seven Conference was organized. In his autobiography, he noted, "The winter of my senior year, which was 1921-22, a Little Seven Conference was organized. At our first annual track competition in St. Charles, I won 6 events and made several marks that were to stand for almost 20 years." The name may have been derived from that of the Big Seven Conference, which was organized in 1916 and included schools such as DeKalb, East Aurora, Elgin, Freeport, Rockford, Joliet, and West Aurora. The Little Seven Conference, Batavia, Dundee, Geneva, Naperville, St. Charles, Sycamore, and Wheaton, included smaller high schools known as lights, while the Big Seven Conference included larger high schools known as heavies. So the coaches. Batavia has had 31 football coaches since 1909, when East Batavia and West Batavia High School united in athletics, over 50% of whom coach basketball and other sports as well. There was no football coach for the 1911 season. The previous year's coach for the 1910 season was Kenneth C. Merrick, who was principal of the high school. During the 1911-12 school year, he focused on basketball and won the Illinois State High School basketball tournament as coach. In the time allotted to me, I cannot do justice to all 31 coaches, so I will highlight 2 that got away. The first is George F. Vinker. So go ahead and put those, go ahead and click through the first page. Those are his birthdays. He coached both football and basketball. He was here for just 1 year, 1917-18. He left at the end of the school year to enter the Air Service in World War I and moved to Texas for flight training. The war ended before he had a chance to actually go overseas, however. So the next page, Stacy. So he came back to the Midwest. He had actually married a Batavia girl while he was here. He coached high school for 8 years in Indiana, and he won the state championship in Indiana in 6 of those 8 years. So he was a good coach. He went to the University of Michigan as the head basketball coach, right from his high school job. Had the highest winning percentage in school history, and still does. He moved to Iowa State University as the head football coach and turned the program around and finished his career as athletic director there. And they've named the golf course at Iowa State University after George Vinker. So John W. Johnny Maurer, who's actually born in Aurora. He graduated from Batavia High School in 1922, and he also was here as a football and basketball coach. At U of I, where he went to school, his roommate was Red Grange. He was the coach here for 1 year, 26 to 27, and again, he was one that got away. He was one of the first players to use the one-handed shot in basketball. He went to Kentucky from Batavia. Not a bad move, again, from going from high school to college. He developed a bounce pass at Kentucky. He had a 40-14 record in 3 years and was succeeded by Adolph Rupp, the famous Adolph Rupp, who was coach at Freeport High School in Illinois. In Tennessee, Johnny Maurer was the fastest to 100 wins in school history. It only took him 131 games, a record that still stands today. He won 2 SEC titles in 8 years, had the highest winning percentage in the modern era at the University of Tennessee. And he's the first and only head coach in the same sport at 3 different SEC schools, including Florida. So as you can see, Batavia didn't have any trouble attracting talent, but I think Batavia was pretty small, and the talent didn't stay here very long back in those days. So. Okay. So moving on to the record, 1913 to 2018. Now that you know more than you ever wanted to know about Batavia's traditions, let's get back to the rivalry. After 100 games in 106 years, only 7 games and 10 points separate the two rivals. As I said before, Batavia's won 44, lost 51, and tied 7. Other highlights, and this image of the baton twirlers is just for fun. I thought you'd enjoy that. As noted in the 1924 Jekyll High, Geneva's yearbook, the Batavia, before it was called the Viking, the Batavia-Geneva rivalry is the biggest game of the season, and strange things happen now and again. The 1981 game was won by Geneva 6-0 on what was described as a wild interception fumble touchdown play in the 4th quarter. The 1958 game was a 6-6 tie that featured a total of 12 fumbles. The 1960 game, won by Geneva 13-12, had what was described as probably the most bizarre touchdown in the history of the Little Seven. This game inspired one of the greatest articles in the annals of the Batavia-Geneva rivalry. The Batavia Herald headline on November 3, 1960 read, "Bulldogs lose by a kick, 13-12. The first paragraph of this article, written by someone named Post Mortem, suggests the tone of the story to follow. And I quote, "Ah, loyal followers of the pigskin in Batavia. It is a sad and battered typewriter that we pound this week as we bring you the story of that Batavia-Geneva football tragedy here last Friday night." And it goes on from there. A total of 14 games were won by 5 points or fewer. The lowest score other than 2 scoreless ties was 2-0, won by Geneva in 1950. The most lopsided score was 64-0, won by Batavia in 1916. The most combined points in a game, 80, occurred in 2011, won by Batavia 46-34. Let's talk about homecoming. I believe that the cheerleader in this photograph is Barbara Kalina's niece. Is that correct?
Probably could be. It looks like one of Kalina's girls.
Okay. I wasn't sure. I wouldn't have said anything if you weren't sitting there. So. Batavia's first homecoming was celebrated on October 23, 1926, at the suggestion of Coach Johnny Maurer. Remember that he went to the University of Illinois, where homecoming was invented in 1910, so he brought the tradition to Batavia. Homecoming was celebrated a second time in 1938, and beginning in 1951, homecoming in Batavia became an annual tradition and an annual celebration. To my surprise, only 8 of the 100 rivalry games were homecoming games. As you can see from this slide, Batavia has won 3 of the 8 games, while Geneva has won 5. Ironically, but perhaps not surprisingly, each team has a better winning percentage on its opponent's field. Batavia won 50% at Geneva, which is not saying much, of course, and Geneva won 66.7% at Batavia. So I guess I have the numbers up there for you. Other factoids: Batavia's overall record was 20-23-5 before Geneva's infamous 19-game winning streak from 67 to 85. In 1993, Mike Gasperi handed Jerry Oxtetter his only loss to Batavia in 21 career rivalry games as head coach by a score of 31-16. Batavia's record since Geneva's win streak ended, so from 1916 to 2018, is 24-9. The only overtime game in the tiebreaker era, which started in 1975, occurred in 2003, a 20-17 4-overtime thriller won by Batavia. The score at the end of regulation was 0-0.
Oh.
Each year, NBC Sports Chicago follows one program throughout the season. This year, 2018, that team is Batavia. And the best factoid of all, in 2006, Batavia defeated Geneva in the IHSA football playoff semifinal round to qualify for the championship game in Champaign. This is the only time in the series that the teams played 2 games in the same season, and both were won by Batavia. And of course, Batavia has now won the state championship twice, in 2013 and 2017. Now for a few more statistics. which I will not read, but I want to show you. So most combined points in a game, Batavia owns the top 3 slots in that category right now. And then the next slide is least combined points in a game. And we had 2 scoreless ties back in the day. And then Geneva had that 2-0 victory. And then there are several 6-0 and 7-0 games. Most lopsided scores. Well, Batavia has the top 2 slots there, 64-0 in 1916, and last year 49-0. So sometimes the games get a little out of hand. And this year, of course, was 41-0. Closest scores, games won by fewer than 6 points, excluding the ties. So you can see that there are several 1 and 2 and 3-point games on that chart. Longest winning streaks. Well, I've mentioned more than I ever should have that Geneva won 19 in a row. But Batavia, this year, Coach Piron got 8 in a row for the second time in history. And I have a feeling he wants to keep that streak going. And most shutouts in which the opponent was held scoreless, but Geneva had 23 and Batavia had 19. There were 2. The total number of games was actually only 40 because there were 2 tie games in there. So, yells. By now some of you may be wondering, what happened to the yells? He promised me yells. Well, your wait has ended. Do we have any former or current cheerleaders in the room? Nary a one, okay. Well, then you all need to help me. So, Peeler Bergeson, class of 1945, and his wife Ethel taught me this cheer in September 2010. For those who do not speak Swedish, sluss means fight, and pojka means boys. So in English, sluss, pojka, sluss means fight, boys, fight. So I want everyone to join in. Are you ready? Sluss, pojka, sluss. Sluss, pojka, sluss. Sluss, pojka, sluss, pojka, sluss, pojka, sluss. I almost feel like Roger Beals, who I was told actually taught this yell to cheerleaders throughout his long career on the sidelines of Batavia. So next, I learned this one at the Batavia-Geneva game in 2012. Once again, everyone join in. B, B-A, B-A-T-A, B-I-A. That was pretty good. You guys are good. Finally, the famous, at least to some of us, strawberry shortcake cheer. Who knows the strawberry shortcake cheer? I see a few hands in the audience, okay. So, once again, everybody join in. You'll find it's got a nice rhythm to it because it got turned into a jump rope rhyme at some point. So, strawberry shortcake, huckleberry pie, V-I-C-T-O-R-Y. Are we in it? Well, I guess. Batavia High School, yes, yes, yes. You guys are great. So strawberry shortcake huckleberry pie was actually widely used across the country. It dates to the 1920s or even earlier. And as I said, it even inspired a well-known jump rope rhyme. Well, I've been talking for about as long as it seems. And my script says, if we ran late, which probably is likely, to express my appreciation for your patience. So I do express my appreciation for your patience. And before you leave today, I'll have up in front here copies of the newly updated copy of the printed version of the biggest game of the season as my gift to you. And thank you for allowing me to share my passion for Batavia football with you this afternoon. Any questions before we adjourn? I see a hand, yes.
Yeah, George, when you were talking about names, I remember the Cobden Apple Knockers. They didn't play football, but the Cobden Apple Knockers were in the basketball.
That's wonderful.
They mine for odd names.
Cobden?
Cobden, Illinois, and they were the
Cobden Apple Knockers. That's a great nickname for it. Yes.
Nickname, George.
Okay.
Pardon me?
Polo Marcos.
The Polo Marcos. Oh my goodness.
Pretty sure that's their team nickname.
That is very clever. The Polo Marcos. Yes.
When did we add the gold, the crimson gold?
The earliest reference I found to that was in March 1911. So sometime prior to March 1911, the school got the colors crimson and gold, and have kept them all these years. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, thank you.
A lot of work.
I used to go to Lakeview High School.
You went to Lakeview High School? What was your nickname? Their nickname?
I don't remember.
I'm putting you on the spot, Betty. I apologize for that. Anyway, I've got copies of the book up here, and you're all welcome to take a copy. And if you have a friend who wants one, be sure to. Oh, yes, there was another question? No? Okay. Thank you again. I enjoyed being here with you.
Thank you.